I'm really excited today to introduce our speaker. Phil Hayes is the Vice President of the Arnold Group. Phil has been a leading voice for the employer community across the state of Kansas regarding critical unemployment reforms in response to the pandemic. Phil is an expert in this arena and is speaking in conjunction with the broader business community in Kansas. Phil is currently the chairman of the Kansas Employment Security Review Board with the Kansas Department of Labor. Phil, if you could just go ahead and start your presentation now, we will get to some questions at the end. Thank you.
Sounds good. Good day, Derby Chamber of Commerce members. Thank you, Mark, for the great introduction and the opportunity to speak with your membership today. We have a lot of information I'm going to try to cover in a short amount of time. The good news is it's recorded and you can come back and revisit this. If we're interested in having the slide deck, I can certainly share that with Mark and he can get that out to the membership as well. So my name is Philip Hayes. I'm with the Arnold Group. I've been very involved in the unemployment reform space in the state of Kansas for more than a decade. Myself and Jeff Oswald with Unemployment Insurance Services out of Lee Summit, Missouri. He does a tremendous amount of business. He's a third-party administrator for unemployment claims management. He and I have really kind of tag teamed through a lot of the reform initiatives historically since 2008, and we're back at it in 2020 and 2021. So we'll go ahead and jump through here. Again, welcome. We're going to walk through kind of the Kansas UI landscape, where we've been most recently, where we're at and where we're going. And then we're going to look at some business community reforms that the business community has brought forth to Topeka. We've introduced a pretty large comprehensive bill with legislative support. And that the bill is working through a little bit quicker in the House, but the Senate is just now really taking up the bill in earnest, and we're seeing some traction there now. So we'll close with some questions, and hopefully we cover the appropriate path that we need to. So we're just kind of hitting on how did we get here and what are we supposed to do, and I'm going to bring the perspective from the business owner or maybe the HR professional, but really how did we get here? You can see on this graphical chart here, the beginning of 2020, our total initial unemployment claims in Kansas was relatively low. March 15th hit, the reporting week of 321 showed that our initial claims spiked up north of 20,000. The following week, we hit our high water mark, and we really felt like that was going to be the absolute high point of 50,000 in 1 week. We trailed off for the next couple of months, but really you can see the pattern and the trend line that once toward the end of the summer, middle of the summer, actually, we started spiking back up, and there was a little bit of concern there. There's a lot of conversation between HR professionals across the state that some of the claims that we started seeing in the summer just didn't pass the smell test. There's a lot of crisscrossed data information. Socials didn't belong with names didn't belong to our organizations, etc. And we started beating that drum and trying to communicate and reach out to the administration or the Kansas Department of Labor to share our concerns. This next chart really just shows the continued claims. So not only once somebody initializes their claim, but this is the weekly continuation of those claims. You can see we were north of 100,000 in May timeframe, and that pattern started to decrease again once we got a little bit further, really on the back end of the summer, early part of the fall. The trend line started reversing again, and it actually took a pretty aggressive approach with that. So Jeff Oswald, when we went and presented or testified with the Kansas Senate Commerce Committee and the House Commerce and Economic and Labor Committee on January 26th, the latest data that we had was from March 16th. And what was alarming to us at that time is Kansas has less than 1% of the US population, yet that particular week, Kansas ranked third as far as the highest number of initial claims across the states. California came in at nearly 13%, Illinois a little over 11%, and Kansas pushing 7% of all initial claims. You can see on the bottom chart there, Our neighboring states, what I would consider our Midwestern peer states, Colorado, Missouri, Iowa, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Nebraska, their claim levels for one state, Colorado, was 13,700. Nebraska had 2,700 that same week. Kansas was at 66,323. Our 6 peer states in the region had a total of 31,000 claims. So Kansas had more than twice the amount that 6 other combined states in the Midwest had collectively. You can see on the far right here, again, initial claims, percentage of unemployment claims to our state employment. We were running at about a tenfold of what some of the larger states were, but then also against our peer states. So we definitely had an issue, and really reconfirmed the notion that the HR community said we had an issue going on in mid to late summer through the fall, and as winter hit, we just seen an explosion. We did the same calculation here with continued claims. You can see that same week ending, we had 102,000 continued claims. Our peer states collectively together were at 182,000. So we were running about 60% of what 6 additional states were running collectively together. So we ran the same metric for week ending 123. You can see our initial claims spiked up, and Kansas actually moved up into the 2nd spot. We were pushing about 9.5% of all the initial claims in a single week for the United States. Only Illinois outpaced us. So we're definitely not in a good position with that. The good news is, at the conclusion of our testimony on 126, I think the very next day, the Kelly administration, or Governor Kelly, had made an announcement that they were going to shut the unemployment system down in Kansas and add on a dual factor or multi-factor authentication for identity verification. And what's frustrating from the business community, from a business owner standpoint, is this solution was probably applied 6 to 8 months too late, because we've really seen how the floodgates opened around the holidays. And we just seen that explosion beginning in October, November. December was a sharp increase, but January, it just absolutely exploded. And we had a huge amount of fraud dollars walk out of the state, just for the lack of not having a good identity verification system in place. So again, frustration. It would have been nice had we hit the brakes and shut the system down prior to our huge exposure points. Just the amount of money that could have saved the unemployment trust fund in the state would have been great. So just a quick visual. The top graph here shows the US trend line as far as initial claims from January of 21. You'll see Kansas down at the bottom in the blue graph. Our initial spike mirrored the national trend line, and really kind of stood pretty true up through about July. Once we hit August, we started spiking back upward. Jeff Oswald had indicated that he had started seeing a rash of a huge number of unemployment claims coming from school districts in August, which is the beginning of a school year. Typically, school districts will not lay off at the beginning of the school year. They may do that at the end of the school year, but there's typically reasonable assurance somebody's going to continue in their role for the upcoming school year. So that was a big tell sign for us. And we started spiking. I think from August to November, I felt like we were, as a business community, we were on the kiddie roller coaster at Worlds of Fun. And you can see once the holidays hit, we got off the kiddie roller coaster and jumped on the Mamba, and we started climbing to the highest point. And the good news is, with the shutdown at the end of January, we at least capped that off. I don't know how high we would have went, but we at least hit that. The bad thing is the downward ride that we're going to have over the next coming years as a result of the fraud that did get paid out is going to be an unfortunate ride for the business community. So just to kind of give you some comparison as far as what we've engaged with, and when I say we, it's the business community. We Kansas SHRM, Myself, Jeff, we've worked with local chambers. I think Mark's group with the Derby Chambers put on an early webinar last year on the WorkShare program as a resource for businesses. But we worked with NFIB. We worked with a national association on unemployment reforms. We've worked with other third-party administrators trying to get a handle on this and shape some of our reforms. But in August, we actually wrote a letter to the Office of the Recovery for in hopes that it would get to the Spark Committee. We were told that through the current administration, the Office of Recovery would not pass that information on to the Spark Committee. We were asking for an infusion to the Kansas Unemployment Trust Fund of $300 million out of the CARES Act dollars because we knew we were going to have a hole with the fraud and the improper payments. The U.S. Department of Labor had issued numerous notices throughout 2020 to all the state workforce agencies or departments of labor saying fraud was coming. And we sensed it in middle part of the year. So we were looking for some solution to help kind of plug that hole and the negative economic impact that it's going to have on the business community as we try to recover. But we did testify in September, November in front of the Special Committee on Economic Recovery. This was a joint committee between Kansas House Representatives and Kansas Senators. At the conclusion of that, they took our recommendations and that essentially became kind of the platform where we started building some of our reforms and the bills that we've introduced. Since the beginning of the year, we've testified in front of the Senate Commerce, the House Commerce, House Appropriations numerous times. The most recent was yesterday, February 16th. If you're interested or if you have an interest in reality TV, this is probably the best series on TV this year. I've got kids, my kids are 20 to 26 years old, and they watch every update as it comes out and develops, and they're definitely vested in this because they've seen the fight that we've got going on. So this will give you a lot more perspective if you've got a little bit of time to fill. There's been lots of news media since Jeff and I testified on the 26th of January. Numerous stories have come out, reports, written articles, etc. There's concern presented in some of these articles. So, and then some of the things that KDOL has done really since the system has come down, they've launched a new security system to fight the fraud. This was the shutdown from January 30th to February 2nd. They put that multi-factor authentication to verify identity. Within the, kind of getting ahead of myself here, but the number of login attempts and bot attacks that have come up since we put that system in place has been astronomical. But DOL has launched an unemployment tax related call center. There's information at this link, some 1099-G resources that you can pass on to your employees if they received a 1099 that they weren't planning to get or receive, or if they did receive benefits but haven't received their 1099, there's some processes available through their website. When I talk about the failed or the blocked login attempts and the bot attacks, February 8th, 6 days after the system came back up, they had indicated that they blocked over 1 million fraudulent login attempts. As of Monday, 2 days ago, actually on the 15th, DOL published that they've stopped 4.5 million fraudulent login attempts and bot attacks on the KDOL unemployment system. So that really just tells you why we started seeing this explosion in January with the number of initial claims. Our system truly was under attack. So it's great that we put in that solution. But again, I'm just going to echo it that it's probably 6 to 8 months later than we should have actually implemented that. So really now, where are we going? How do we get there? And so we're trying to chart a path forward. I think with the amount of coverage, the concerns around the fraud exposure that our state has experienced, this has to be a referendum on the current legislature to get something done this year. We cannot afford to miss this opportunity in this window in 2021 because 22 is going to have huge financial implications if nothing is done. So I'm going to walk through kind of what I guess what I call the top 10. There's a little bit more detail in the actual bill. But the first thing that we're looking at is establishing and standing up a modernization council to ensure that we have the appropriate parties at the table. We've got employers, employees or claimants, legislators, and members from KDOL. So we've got, again, business, labor, and the administration or the agency. Historically, I would say the business community voice and the claimant voice has never been a part of this process as far as dictating a system that we think is viable as we are the primary customers of it. The employers fund the system, the claimants are the primary beneficiaries of the system. So we think those are two critical voices that need to be involved. The primary focus of this council really is just to review and recommend IT upgrades and infrastructure to help file claims and pay benefits, as well as look at the customer experience. The claimants and employers alike throughout this pandemic have had nothing but frustration regarding the communication and that customer experience in utilizing the system. So we want to look at responsiveness. We want to look at data sharing across systems related to UI compensation and look at that efficiency. And then also, are there gains that DOL can achieve with other programs that they administer as well. So once we have the council and kind of the guidance and helping let that take shape, we definitely want to establish a finish line to get a modern system in place for Kansas. Our bottom line is we want a modern, reliable, and modifiable system with a huge focus on system integrity. And the deadline that we're looking at is the end of calendar year 22. That may seem aggressive. Other states have done it. Some states will take baby steps and do the claims piece of it. Others will just do the tax instrument piece of it. And then there's other states that have done a big bang and they've actually launched it all together. And that's likely what Kansas is going to have to do if we want to chase an aggressive deadline. But this cannot be a one and done. Our system was born in the mid 70s when the first Atari came out. So if you're playing Pong, that's essentially what we're using to administer the tax collections as well as the claimant benefit distribution as well. So we want to make sure that if we get this upgraded and to a newer platform, that we're not going to fall asleep on this again for 40 years. We need a continual development process plan to ensure that we stay current and we don't fall behind the times. So just some of the components that we would like from the employer community is just dynamic reporting, understanding what the status of any claim is at any given time, not having to wait until the fall of every year to get a chargeability notice. We'd like to be able to see our claims develop in real time. But really just self-service features are a big component. So again, it's not impossible. It's definitely possible with the appropriate oversight. So, and that's the importance of the Modernization Council. Next, we're going to talk about, I've had family and friends that received their unemployment claim determination notice at the beginning of the pandemic in March. Traditional benefits expire after 26 weeks in Kansas, so roughly 6 months. But I've had family and friends that received a tax notice memo letter at the end of December saying, hey, just want to let you know your benefits were taxable at the federal level as well as the state level. So you will have a tax liability due on tax day in April. And we just think it's a prudent thing to do to put that notice at the front end with the initial claimant's determination saying you're qualified for benefits. And if you're interested, you can put some tax withholdings in place so you're not stuck with a big liability for the end of the year. The fourth component that we're looking at is just really bringing in some transparency in the UI trust fund computations and data reporting. The snapshot screen shares here are really, it's a fall report, a memo that every state agency has to certify the distribution of taxable wages and experience factors. So you can see the rate groups, the lower reserve limits, the number of accounts or number of employers that are in with each rate group, and the associated taxable wages for each of that. This is good. The summary data, the second page is good, but there's also some other critical data that we would like to see so the business community can keep a better pulse on the direction of our fund and the health of the fund. So it's just better communication overall. Number 5, Kansas duration of benefits. We just want to realign the provision that was passed in 2013. We set a lower threshold of a 4.5% state unemployment rate that would dictate that Kansas would qualify for 16 maximum weeks versus 26. So we've got it on a sliding scale, anything under 4.5%, anything under 6%, and anything over 6%. It'd be 16, 20, or 26 weeks of benefits eligible. We just want to realign our lowest threshold to that 4.5 that was negotiated with between business and labor in 2013. And we would just like to align that threshold with the national definition or the national acceptance of the Federal Reserve's base unemployment rate threshold of 5% as full employment in the state or the country. So number 6 is really a key critical provision here when we think about the amount of fraud and improper payments that walked out of our state and didn't even get in the hands of legitimate claimants. This money not only is out of our state, but probably left our country in quick fashion. So the provision with this is to hold employers harmless for any fraudulent claim, any improper payments due to the antiquity of our system, and also any COVID-related claims that was expressed in the CARES Act as well. So employers will be held harmless. The bad thing is if we can't recoup those dollars from the bad actors, the crime rings that were infiltrating our system, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. I think I went on record January 26 saying that my best estimate is our exposure is $300 to $600 million that were paid out of our trust fund. And there's been other estimates from other consultants that I've seen as high as 700 million. And so the intent of this is we can't get the money back from the bad actors overseas, but how can employers be held harmless? We've been told that employers will not be charged. We won't receive it on our chargeability rating. But the bad thing is that the trust fund has been depleted and we're going to have to replenish it. And the only way you can replenish a trust fund in Kansas is additional tax contributions or tax dollars from Kansas employers. So we may not be charged for it, but we're certainly going to pay for it unless we can find the provisions in this bill is to either look at additional pandemic relief CARES dollars from the feds, utilizing some of that, or having the legislature wrestle with it out of the state general fund or other funds at the state level, because employers were beating on this drum saying this is coming, it's going to be a problem, and essentially nothing was done to stem the tide with the outflow of the fraud dollars. 7 here, this is where I probably have the most meat and probably where it's going to affect you on kind of the boots on the ground piece of it. It deals with your chargeability notices that you get in the fall every year, as well as your experience rating notice. In 2015, we actually wanted the solvency adjustments to be proportional. We lost that battle with KDOL. And so this is a provision that it essentially is going to strangle some small businesses, large businesses alike, by overtaxing them. And so instead of looking at any solvency adjustments as a flat full load, we want to proportionalize that so that cascades based on your true experience rating. So you can read through this slide, but just to kind of drive the point home, if nothing is done this year in the Kansas legislature, the top 10 best rate groups in Kansas represent nearly 65% of all rated employers, or just a hair under 38,000 employers across the state. Those 38,000 employers will see a rate for their state unemployment insurance. They'll see an increase ranging from 180% to 800%. So an average increase for nearly 38,000 employers is going to be about 490% on January 1st of 2022. The worst rated employers, the bottom 11 groups in our current structure, has right under 3,200 employers, represents about 5.4% of all rated employers across the state. they're only going to see an increase from 21 to 28%. And that's the nature of the full load solvency adjustments, because they've already got an elevated earned rate, that their stack on full solvency adjustment isn't near as cumbersome for them or burdensome for them. So they're going to see an average increase of less than 25% compared to the best employers in the state, nearly at 500% collectively. To give you, and I promise I won't swim in the weeds too much, but to give you some perspective, the rate groups channel on the far left here, rate groups 1 through N11, N stands for negative. That means they've paid in less contributions than the amount of benefits that have been applied against their account. So the standard earned rate also ticks up 0.2 of a basis point as you progress downward. So you've got the worst actors, they've not managed their claims nearly as well as the best actors or employers in the state. So if you take the earned rate of the best rated employer at 0.2, the current full solvency adjustment is 1.6 that we're looking at for January 1st of 22. That would be an 800% increase. So you'd have a full load of 1.8%. So instead, what we would like to do is take that full solvency load of 1.6, divide that by the 38 groups, you get a factor. And so the best rated group will see a total proposed rate instead of 1.8, they would be at 0.2421%. They would see a 21.5 or 21.05% increase, same as what the worst rated employers do in the state. You can see under the current system, the best rated employers, those that manage their employment, their claims well, they're going to get penalized. Yet the worst rated employers, they have less pain. There's less severity for the economic impact that's going to be coming if we don't change anything. We just want to take this variable and apply it and cascade it top to bottom and give everybody a proportional increase. The fund control table dictates when the schedules come into play. Currently, we have 6 schedules. Rate group or schedule 5 is the neutral table. We actually want to expand the solvency adjustment table and expand a lot more credit tables, but redefine our standard schedule. This works in harmony with the U.S. Department of Labor's solvency standards for each state. So what they recommend is states need to be considered solvent to have a 1.0 multiplier. That's enough to cover benefits to get through the historical 3 highest rate years average over the last 20 years. So a lot of technical jargon there, but this works in harmony with US DOL solvency standards, which prior to the pandemic, US DOL said Kansas needed to have a trust fund balance of nearly $610 million. We were north of $1 billion in January of 2020, and we've depleted that rather quickly. So if we don't change anything, the best rated employer is going to have an additional $22,400 if you're an employer of 100 employees. If you're a 10-person shop, you're going to see an increase in your tax bill of about $2,200 come January. And you'll see that full solvency load, it's the same dollar amount regardless of what rate group that you're in. And where we want to shift this is the right side here. Rate group 1 for an employer with 100 employees will only see an additional $589 because they've got a solid balance on paper and they've paid in historically well over what their usage is on the fund. So if you've not seen an experience rating notice, and if you're a business owner, I assume you see this, you may have this go to your tax accountant. But just to give you an explanation of how this works, this top line is what your balance was prior to June 30th, 2019. The second line, this 18,000, is what we paid in. And I say we, this is a legitimate statement. It is not the Arnold Group's, it's a random one, but I've normalized it to ABC Company out of Smallville, Kansas, took away any identifying information. But this is their contributions last year, what they actually were charged through that fiscal year. And this is their lifetime contributions and their lifetime benefits charged against their account. So you'll take the green minus the red to get an account balance. Next, you're going to look at your taxable payroll, and it's important to understand that your taxable payroll is only the first $14,000 of each employee's wages for the calendar year. So they're going to grab the taxable payroll dollars for 17, 18, and 19. They're going to leave 20 on the shelf. They'll come back to that. It's just the rotation. So we have a total of 6.1 million. Divide that by 3. We end up with our average taxable payroll. So you'll take your balance divided by average taxable payroll, and you end up with a variable. The reserve ratio is what it is used in the formula. And so we're going to go identify where that 14.62 is. 14.62 falls in rate group 7 here. This is a schedule that's published on KDOL's website. It's what's in current statute. And we're also not changing the reserve ratios for businesses in our current reform efforts. So they know they're a rate group 7. And if we track this all the way over, our earned standard rate is 1.4. There's no solvency adjustment in 2021. There will be in 22 if we don't do anything. So our full load is 1.4, or our full earned rate. Now, what happens when the full solvency adjustment hits next year, or if we get our reforms passed? I'm going to break this down. Again, we're going to take the 1.6 solvency increase adjustment, divide that by total rate groups in the system, and we get a variable. We're going to take that variable, the 0.421, multiply it against the rate group that we earn through our standard earned provisions. So we'll take 0.421 times our earned rate group of 7. We get this new surcharge amount, and we're going to add that back to our traditional earned standard rate to end up with our new rate for the upcoming tax year, 1.6947. That serves as a 21.05% overall increase. Whereas if we don't do anything, you're going to have your earned rate of the 1.4 plus the full load of the 1.6 to give you a total SUTA tax rate of 3%. And so somebody in rate group 7 will see a 214% increase next year. And so if you have an employee base of 3 employees, 30 employees, 300 employees, 3,000, or 10,000, you can see that these dollars matter and they add up extremely quick. Just to give you some context, when we started working with KDOL, and I say we, the business community, the green chart is what we came to the table with. The note here is our high watermark was to collect for roughly 463 million in a single year if the trust fund was really in trouble. They said, well, we really don't like that. We feel comfortable collecting 615 million. And I'll also remind you that new employers coming into the state on an average annual basis brings about another $20 million into the trust fund. So we just felt like their numbers were extremely aggressive. We ended up compromising on some of the thresholds. We gave up position on credit tables that they didn't want as many, but we did hold firm on the 1.6. They wanted a higher one. So you'll see that when we were arm wrestling, we did hold our position, and we said 600 plus million in a single year is just too much to take out of the local economies. And when we feel like 463 is sufficient. And why we say that, historically, the most we had ever collected was in 2015. We collected north of 468 million. But our fund has served us well by not collecting 600 million any given year. 3-year average is about 400 million. When you look at the trust fund balance, beginning in 1990, we're north of 500 million. We climbed north of 700 million, and that's when the legislature put moratoriums in place and we didn't tax positive rated employers. Our fund balance decreased rather than having a structural system that self-regulated itself, tied with USDOL solvency standards. So we did borrow after the economic downturn of 08. But you can see we've recovered fairly nicely. Average trust fund balances from including the 2001 downturn. This also includes the economic downturn or the financial crisis of 08. You can see the benefit outlay. So we've seen what we're bringing in, what's the historical average of what we pay out. I ran this in 20-year snapshots because that's part of the USDOL conformity laws, is looking at 20-year variables in the highest paid out years. So we looked at prior to the Great Recession, with the Great Recession, And just to bring it in perspective as far as more recent, in 2017, benefits that were paid out of the Kansas Trust Fund in 2017, we paid out about 185 million total. 2018, we paid out 144 million. 2019, we paid out 133 million. In calendar year 2020, we were north of $950 million. So when we talk about $1 billion trust fund at the beginning of last year, that money is essentially gone. And what's difficult is we've had continual additional employer contributions on a quarterly basis throughout 2020, and most recently fourth quarter of 20. Those contributions came in at the end of January. But you can see just in 5 weeks alone in 2021, we paid out nearly $157 million. I'm going to have you backtrack here and look at total payout for a year in 19, 18, and 17. This is the alarming factor, the amount of fraud that we have walking out of our state. So when we look at contributions, and just looking at, there was no credit adjustment in 17 or 18, but we did have a 0.5% credit in 19 and 20. So we actually saved the employer community from our reforms in 15. We saved $142 million additional being paid into our trust fund because we were pushing $1 billion. And so our total tax collections have been 250 million, nearly 300, 275, 270 million. We don't need to collect $600 million, especially if we can get some relief and hold us, the employer community, harmless for the inadequacies within our system that we were utilizing, the vulnerabilities that we had, and the amount of fraud dollars that walked away. So trust fund balance as of January 30th of 21, we're sitting right under $250 million. And you'll see we were actually at 1.2 billion at the front end of 2020. These measurement periods are as of July 31, so they're not completely reflective of what we start a calendar year at. So I will say KDOL is going to come in regarding House Bill 2196 and Senate Bill 177, that it's not going to collect enough tax. We've realigned this with USDOL, with the historical usage of our fund, what we need to pay in to cover the exposure, but then also build ground that we're not going to be in a tough position as we move forward. So we're showing a 372 million plus new employer contributions. We're pushing $400 million again under this new rate structure, largely because we've had economic growth. We've certainly seen some contraction, but being in the jobs business, I don't think there's an employer that we work with, that we've historically worked with over the last couple of years, that is not hiring, that cannot find appropriate talent or even interested candidates for consideration. So we fully expect that the amount that we're looking at from a tax standpoint is going to be more than enough. So what's frustrating, in 2015, KDOL said that Senate Bill 154 at that point would never work. We wouldn't collect enough taxes. Tough thing is, that's the same old talking points. It's just 6 years later. They were not right in 2015, and we feel that they are not right in 2021. Why would why would KDOL dispute the business community's numbers when they've not been cooperative and they've not been willing to communicate with us since the middle part of last year? The tax system that we put in place in 15 completely outperformed expectations. It resulted in a $1 billion plus UI trust fund in Kansas. Our reforms this year are ultimately just fine-tuning and realigning that tax structure. We've been right along the way on a lot of the provisions from Senate Bill 154. This is just basically a tune-up. So if we run the math, our current situation is not because of traditional market pressures. It's a result of the pandemic and that vulnerable IT system that we were utilizing that allowed hundreds of millions of dollars walk out and deplete our funds. So really my message back is, what do you tell one of the 13,000 Kansas employers that laid off 0 employees during the pandemic, yet they're going to be stuck with an 800% SUTA tax increase? Employer UI tax bills beginning in 22 may likely outweigh their state income tax bill if nothing is done. We know that the trust fund has to be replenished. It's on the business community. So we don't feel that the administration should dictate the pace on how quickly we flush the fund up. If we've got a path forward that's responsible, it provides a steady pace, and it also balances the needs for rehiring and rebounding from the economic impact of the pandemic. So we're just saying what's the most equitable path forward. I'd like to say that the fraud issue has largely been resolved with the January 30th through February 2nd shutdown to stack on that identity verification piece. But I think it's critical to note that traditional fraud and improper payment issues will never go away 100%. We do feel that a work search verification process is a good check throughout the life cycle of an unemployment claim. It serves as a natural impediment. The bad thing is, since March 29th, we've been under executive order that Kansas unemployment claimants do not have to engage in the work search process, meaning they don't have to be attached to the labor market. They can collect benefits, and so that's been extremely frustrating from the employer community. The tax system that we created in 2015, again, created a $1.2 billion trust fund in a short 5 years. We did that while collecting less taxes along the way to that $1 billion trust fund. So our primary message is KDOL's seen our numbers, they've seen our fine tuning. It's easy to say that it won't work. We simply say, show us our flaws. Are there concerns with taxable wages, employer balances, calculations of surcharges, contribution estimates, or claimant benefits? I guess, are we wrong in any of the structural data on the formula, or is it simply that KDOL is just uncomfortable with collecting nearly $400 million from the employer community in a single year? And I don't think that we need to look more or at a higher level than that. So coming back to the reform provisions in the bill, we want to provide immediate relief to employer accounts. So we address the hold employers harmless from the pandemic related timeframe from March of 20 through the end of 22, which realigns with the modernization effort of our system. But as we look forward, if there's any improper chair charges or fraudulent determinations, we don't want employers to have to wait for the department to go recoup those dollars. We want to be made whole based on either a system failure or a bad determination or adjudication decision. So, and we're just tying the improper payments to a national reporting, essentially an audit from the U.S. Department of Labor on different states. So, the work share program, if you did watch that webinar through the Derby Chamber last year, the governor did sign an executive order allowing negative rated employers to participate through the pandemic. So we feel like that expansion of the program is actually not a bad one, but it needs to be measured in a manner that a negative rated employer, somebody that is drawing more benefits against what they pay in historically, those are your negative rated employers. We don't want to give them a bite at the apple every single year. We'd like to say, in a true economic downturn or a down business cycle, you can participate once, 1 year out of every 5 years, just to have some sort of stopgap that they're not going to continue to dig a negative hole and ultimately pay out the trust fund at the expense or the subsidization of the better rated employers that are managing their claims more appropriately. And finally, the last one that we want is just if employers are reporting job refusals, we have a commitment or an obligation to report within 10 days to Kansas Department of Labor for any employer notice determinations. And we feel like any job refusals should be annotated and applied in the merit of that adjudication or determination on a claimant's decision. So if we're reporting job refusals, we don't want them to fall into the black hole. We would like some feedback in the same manner that they expect from us to ensure that we have good communication for good decisions. So in closing, I'm just going to say that Kansas cannot rely on Washington, D.C. And just to echo this point, as of today, nearly 22 states have borrowed nearly $49 billion from the feds. They've taken advanced loans. They're interest-free this year, but they will become interest-bearing next year. Kansas borrowed from the economic downturn of 2008. We'll see if we borrow this year yet or not. But I just don't see the feds washing away nearly $50+ billion to help 22 states, but then not recognize and impact responsible states that really had a good trust fund and a good tax mechanism and manage their fund appropriately. So I think we just must take it upon ourselves to do everything in our power to protect our trust fund, our businesses, and impacted citizens or claimants across the state. Business as usual is no longer enough. It's time for new ideas and decisive action. It's going to take the combined efforts of Katie Well, the administration, the legislature, and the Kansas business community. And with record fraud levels and the increased risk of job-killing unemployment tax increases on the horizon, it is incumbent on the legislature to exercise their oversight authority and be part of our solution. So with that, I'm at the end here, and I know there were some questions that came in ahead of time, Mark, so I'm going to let you jump into those, and we'll see if we can sort those out.
Okay, Phil, I know you've touched on a lot of these already, so I'm just going to maybe hit the questions real quick. So first of all, thank you for a great presentation. A lot of information that was covered, and I think it needs to be pointed out. If you did, you talked about it. If you did not file any claims and you haven't for years, this is still going to have a negative impact on your business, regardless if you have 2 employees or 200 employees. And I think that's the point that needs to be driven home, because I think so many people assume, well, we didn't use unemployment last year, it's not going to affect us. So I think that that's really something that needs to be thought of. One of the questions we have is, how is the Department of Labor and Legislation going to address the huge number of fraudulent unemployment claims that have been filed? Many people I know, including myself, have had to deal with that. And so that was from one of our chamber members. So could you kind of touch on that one again?
I mean, and that's, I could probably go 3 different directions with this question. Number one, the hold harmless provisions. We're trying to identify and actually get a quantifiable number on the total fraud that was paid out. And the employer community has a huge voice in this. You need to report fraud if they show up on your chargeability statements. The sad fact is you may not receive that notice until next October of 21. And at that point, you need to reconcile your statement. And if you did report those claims as fraud, annotate, hey, we reported these, but you're also likely going to have some new claims on there that you had no idea, because employers weren't getting notices on every fraud determination or fraudulent claim. So this is going to be a process that will impact for the next year. And some of the provisions that the bills are taking shape is we're going to see if we can identify some future CARES Act dollars coming in this new bailout from the feds. We're going to allocate a set dollar amount from that, but then we're also going to allow that DOL needs to reconcile all fraudulent determinations by a certain date, and then whatever gap there is from what we got from the CARES dollars to if there's additional dollars, then there's going to be provisions that will likely have the state reinfuse the trust fund to those dollar amounts. And so some of the stop gaps are, well, we could freeze the standard table going into 22, or we pass these solvency adjustments at the proportional components that we're looking at in these bills. And that's going to take off some of the sharpness. But it's critical if we can get some of the CARES dollars by July 31, because that'll naturally keep us likely in our traditional standard schedule, and we won't see an increase over this year.
Okay, thank you. Another one is, will employers be penalized for the fraudulent claims? It sounds like they're going to be. And
yes and no, Mark, on that. Right now, it feels like we are, but I think if we demonstrate some patience and play the long game here, this legislation is likely to play out in the favor of employers to ensure that we're held harmless on fraud, improper payments, and COVID-related claims when it was it was not the fault of an employer if the state order said your business had to shut down. You're also supposed to be held harmless from that. But the fund has to be replenished. So to some degree, I don't think we're going to be completely held harmless 100%.
Do you think the government or the legislation is going to meet employers halfway on a lot of these issues?
The intent that is in these bills is to meet more than halfway. It's really to cover, basically fill in the hole that we created through the legacy system that we had, through the volume of claims that came in, and just the security exposures that we had that allowed a lot of the crisscross data to cross-pollinate.
Okay, and I think the last one, I know you covered this. So any rate increases, employers are not going to see until 2022. So they can kind of breathe easy this year, but next year, if things don't change, the hammer is going to drop. Is that a fair statement?
That is very accurate. I've done countless presentations like this. My contact information was there. I've had employers reach out to me saying, okay, if something doesn't change, can you give us an idea of where you think we might fall? Because it's not just a matter of understanding what your rate group is this year, depending on your chargeability and the impact of what your historical layoffs and claim benefit usage is. There's a number of scenarios that we can game plan for, and looking at what that notice is going to be, or what that increase will be January 1st of 2022.
Okay. Well, Phil, I think that with all the questions we have, a lot of information that was covered. If any of you have follow-up questions, which I'm sure some of you will, please feel free to reach out to me. You can call me at the chamber, 788-3421, or send me an email, mark@derbychamber.com, and I will get those questions to Phil, and he'll get back with you via me or maybe directly back to you, depending on the question. If it's a question that affects a lot of people, we may put something in our e-news coming up later next month. So we'll just have to see what kind of questions come in. Again, Phil Hayes with the Arnold Group, thank you. You are a wealth of information. On a personal note, you helped us out quite a bit this year trying to navigate this pandemic and shared work, which is a wonderful system. So thank you for all your help on that. And but Phil is a wealth of information at the Arnold Group. If you want to, reach out to him and talk to him about that at a later time. So Phil, thank you. And again, if you've got questions, please give us a call. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.